Welcome, everyone, to the Living in Oneness and Community Circle call with today's special guest, Jeffrey Gignac. I am Nanette Rogers-Kennedy here with my colleague Dee Meyer. We are the co-coordinators of Humanities Team Community Circle. And Humanities Team has over 100,000 teammates in over 150 countries. We would like to thank all of our donors for your financial nurturing of the Community Circle. And we'd also like to thank all of our in-kind donations through our volunteers. Without both of groups of you, we would not be able to carry out our work in the world. As you know, those who have listened in before, we have access to many extraordinary speakers. Today it is our great pleasure to share with you Jeffrey Gignac. Jeffrey is bringing in tools to create a life of love through realizing your connection with your higher self, source, and God through sound. We will be covering what is possible when you learn to take spiritual action. By making significant changes for yourself, all creatures and Mother Earth benefit. Through the energy of oneness, we can create heaven on earth by using the knowledge Jeffrey shares with us today. You will empower positive change to bring out the very best in you. We are going to go deep and cover as much ground as we can during this 1-hour call, which always goes very quickly. We hope to take a few questions, so if you could put your questions in the question and answer box via the webcast, that would be great. And just give us your first name and where you're listening from with your question, and we'll take it from there. Over to you, Dee.
Thanks, Nanette. It's my pleasure to introduce Jeffrey Gignac. He is a clinical hypnotherapist, a master practitioner of neuro-linguistic programming, and a recognized expert in goal achievement. He's also the creator of 100 acclaimed brainwave entrainment audios and meditation programs that continue to revolutionize the field of personal development. Jeffrey has not only helped thousands of individuals overcome challenges and live their dreams, but has worked with government-funded agencies and corporations as well. In fact, he is considered to be one of the world's leading innovators in brainwave entrainment synchronization technology. And through this technology, in helping people live the exact life they desire, faster and easier than they ever thought possible. On this call, you will discover how to bridge the gap between your conscious and subconscious mind so you can effortlessly access your own personal power, inner wisdom, and guidance anytime you wish. Experience the law of attraction like never before by eliminating the two most common problems that cause struggle and block manifestation in our lives. Discover how to effortlessly create the exact emotions you want anytime you wish, and have this direct experience of brainwave entrainment. Welcome, Jeffrey.
Hi, Dee. So happy to be here today.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Would you share a little bit about your background and how it informs your work, and how does oneness play a part in your work?
Wow. Well, so my background is, it's quite a story, right? I mean, for me, this is a passion, and it started when I was really young. You know, when I was growing up, I struggled in school. I mean, a lot of people thought I had learning disabilities, and I may have had learning disabilities and developmental delays. And the only thing that really kept me moving forward from grade to grade is that when the right circumstances presented themselves, I was able to, in fact, demonstrate I was learning. And I was really lucky that I had two parents as psychologists because, you know, they were able to work with the teachers in the schools to create these ideal circumstances. And they're all, the teachers and my parents, their hope was just that, you know, if I kept continuing and moving forward, hopefully all my difficulties would just sort of go away, which sometimes does happen. But for me, it didn't happen that way. And I continued to struggle with math, and I mean, I was science, reading. I was pulled out of class on a regular basis for speech therapy. I mean, there's no end to the problems that I had. And so one day my parents said, okay, we're going to bring Jeffrey in to get a neuropsych evaluation. And they put EEGs on my head, and They ran me through all these kinds of tests. And what was really great about that day is that what their diagnosis was. They said that, it seemed to them that all the areas of my brain were working as they should, but the problem as they saw it was that there was significant communication gaps in my brain. And in essence, everything wasn't communicating with each other as it should. It was just a bunch of individual parts. But for my parents and for me, we took this as a really positive thing because it was just a communication problem, right? And so my parents did some research. Neuroscience in the 70s isn't what it is now, but they did the best they could. They devised all kinds of things, and they helped me day in and day out after school. And eventually, it was like a light turned on, right? And that my brain suddenly felt fully connected, and I was able to read normally. I didn't need any special help anymore. And anything that I focused on, I began to succeed at. And so this is really young, right? And so while I didn't understand why everything they did worked and why it worked at the time, I did know this. It was the effort and all the research and all the work they did with me in my mind and my brain that really saved me from a life that could have gone very differently. And so it was back then that this passion for helping others that struggle as I did, and maybe in ways that I never did struggle, really grew in me and has continued to grow to this very day. And so I've never stopped. It's all been, for me, a journey to find very effective ways to help people that struggle. And oneness, how does that incorporate to everything? Well, as I've grown older, I've discovered, I think like so many of us do, that we are all in this together. We have aspects of ourselves that we see as individual, but I mean we're really all a part of this earth and this universe and this collective. And it's what I've realized is that for us to really get in touch with that and be empowered, we have to get rid of this negativity that we're bombarded with every single day. Day in and day out. And so many of us develop habits of negative thinking, and they're automatic, right? They just seem to come out of nowhere, and that really holds us back. It stops us from connecting to our higher self, to our true self, to our heart. We know in science that we have this thing called the heart brain, and the heart is the only organ that sends more information to the brain than the brain sends to the heart. But the problem is, can we hear it? Can we take advantage of that information? And when we're spinning in negativity and we're feeling bad, right, we can't hear that information because those emotions choke off our ability to access our intuition and our higher thinking, our social consciousness. So the technology that I've developed and the work that I do is really at its foundation, at its core, is to help clear up the brain, the mind, to inoculate people against negativity, to train them to be able to be in this consistent state of connectedness so that we can hear what the heart is telling us and we can access that intuition and that connectedness and that oneness that we're all a part of.
Beautiful. And to me, it fascinates me because, when you are in that cycle of negativity, it just is all-consuming. And to have a tool to break out of that so that, you don't wake up in the morning focusing on problems, it's really an impressive piece of work you're bringing forward. I have another question for you. Your brainwave simulation engineering protocols were born from your personal experiences. What aspects of your own life directed you towards this work? You answered that to some degree in your previous question, but I wonder if you want to go a little deeper on that.
Yeah, there's, through my life I've always been interested in anything that would help the mind, help the brain, help people that struggled. And so I researched all kinds of things. I mean, I was, at the age of 15, I became one of the youngest certified practitioners in neurolinguistic programming in the world. Quickly became a clinical hypnotherapist and never stopped. But I went through later on in my early adulthood some significant struggles and some significant pain certain things I went through, people said that, I mean, they were shocked that I would ever have these problems based on, my experiences and how I began to excel at such an early age. But, it happened to me. And so I was looking for a solution to really get myself out of this negative way of thinking. I got trapped in a job that I hated, right? And my whole, the whole thing was that I was going to take this job that I paid my way through university, and that I was only going to stay there in a couple of years, but it turned out to be one of these golden handcuff jobs, right? Where, the money's really good and, let's just kind of grin and bear it. And I ended up being there for like 13 years. And my goal, and during that whole time, I wanted to start my business and really get out in the world and help people. And no matter what I did, it was the wrong decision. Right? And I later learned why that was, is that I was so filled with stress. I was so filled with negativity. It was one of the worst work environments anybody could ever be in terms of exposure to negativity, that my brain simply could not make a good decision. Right? Everything I did was wrong. I'd take a step forward, then 5 steps back. And so I was looking for a solution to help me sleep and just sort of help me get positive again. And I came across brainwave entrainment technology, and I started looking at the research, and the research started to, I was fascinated right from the beginning, because they were saying things like, some doctors were able to improve intellectual functioning in deficient children by as much as 17 points inside of a year, right? So that caught my interest. They were saying, hey, we can improve intelligence scores for children with ADD, ADHD by an average of 33% on standardized tests inside of 6 weeks. So, it really piqued my interest, but it started to read a little bit like science fiction after a while, right? Because it's like, how is that possible? Because brainwave entrainment, as I was reading it then, really consists of just light and sound stimulation. So I had a hard time wrapping my head around it, right? How is it that you can raise a person's IQ, what amounts to flashes of light and sound? And so as I continued to dive into it, I became more and more fascinated. And so I said I had to find out for myself. So I picked up what would be the first EEG machine. I now have 5 of these things which measure brainwave activity, and I started to test it. And really soon, I started to feel a positive shift in my own attitude and my own behavior. I started to notice intellectual improvements in ways that I couldn't even think to predict, right? So and the whole time I couldn't help but think there was a missing piece to this technology, that there was some untapped potential that we were all missing, everybody in the industry. And I really set a goal to find this untapped potential, to find what this could really do for people. And so that's how I really got into this technology. It was all about finding a better way.
Annette, are you with us? Annette? Well, apparently...
Hello. I was on mute. Anyway, a very fascinating bit of information there, because I think all of us have had times, especially in our youth and growing up, where this could have been very beneficial for a lot of us that didn't have the access to this kind of work. Jeffrey, there's a lot of conversation about mental tipping points, about global awakening to a higher consciousness. How do you hope to accomplish these things with your work? Is it a personal mission, or is it? Well, from what you've already said, it's partially a personal mission. But go ahead.
Well, it's a personal mission, but it's a global mission, because I strive to be better myself every single day. And I think it's in doing that we can assist other people to be better, to be more connected, and to really raise the vibration of everyone. And for me, one of the key factors to getting there is really getting out of that negativity cycle, that stress cycle, because this is what we've discovered, is that negative emotions, negative feelings, and all this stuff cause the blood flow and electricity in the brain to condense and restrict away from really important areas of our brain. And it gets stuck in areas that make it really easy to sustain negativity, to sustain negative emotions. And if we're able to shift and move that blood flow and electrical activity into another area of the brain, what we find is that those things that make it really easy to stay negative turn off. And things that make it really easy and more likely to stay positive, all the way down to the chemicals, right, that we produce in the brain, turn on, right? And then when the blood flow and electricity is in those areas of the brain, what we see, it's very hard to be negative. It's very hard to sustain negative thinking. And for me, that's the first step, right? We talk about all the time, we attract what we feel, what we think all day long. So having some tools to give to the world to help them just train the brain. And see, this is the thing. When you use this type of technology or you practice mindfulness or you practice positivity, you're really training your brain to operate that way more often without even having to think about it. And to me, that's where the real power is, right? Is that when we use all these tools that we have to really train ourselves to be positive automatically without even having to think about it. Our natural reaction is towards happiness, to oneness, to connectedness. And that's how I see myself as part of this whole mission, not only for just myself, but for the world in bringing about change.
You remind me of we'll never be able to bring this person's name to my mind at the moment, but this person was talking about how when you do things to bring yourself to more awareness, a higher consciousness, that it's like bushwhacking a new trail in your brain, and you stay off that other trail that might be the negativity. So I find what you just said really fascinating, because that falls right into that same business of retraining the brain. So,
and it's so very important, because we're in, we have this beautiful spiritual heart-based connected side, but we're in these 3D bodies with the brain, so we got to address it.
And it seems that brain training is obviously complementary to so many things in our lifestyles and lifestyle enhancement. And, particularly when we live in this seemingly, at times, chaotic world. Can you give us an example of what your ideal client would look like for your work?
Wow, anybody that struggles, and anybody that wants to be better, right? It's when I have private clients, I do an interview first, right? And together we try to figure out if this is going to be a really ideal match, right, for private clients. But in terms of, and if it's not, I have people that I refer people to, and then the other people refer people to me, right, because we just always want to do the best job we can, the highest good for everybody. But when it comes to the products I create that are designed for mass consumption, really anybody that wants to train their brain to work better more often, anybody that wants to increase their ability to be happy, to increase their sense of well-being. And there's a couple things that people have to be aware of when it comes to the video aspects of my technology, the light stimulation. There are a few people that should never use the technology, people that are that have risk factors for epilepsies or seizures. They should stay away from light stimulation for sure, and sometimes even auditory stimulation. And, people that are under the age of 18 that haven't been assessed by a doctor yet, for risk factors for epilepsies or seizures, But other than that, it's really just about anybody that wants to be better.
Well, what comes to my mind is you were misdiagnosed as a child, and you pursued a better life through brain training and brain science at an early age. So I'm thinking about the children today that have been labeled with ADHD or autism or some of these other things, that they're being heavily medicated Can you talk to that? Is this something that could help children work through some of those problems?
Absolutely. I mean, for me, they kind of misdiagnosed me all over the place, and we found out it was just that I had communication gaps, right? And but you know, some of the best research that has happened in this industry has been people with ADHD, ADD, and even Asperger's. I mean, we're talking about a 33% increase in intellectual performance on 5 key areas on the WISC-3 standardized tests inside of 6 weeks, 2 sessions, 15 to 30 minutes a week. Wow. 81% improvement on freedom from distractibility with ADD kids. Yeah, so the answer is yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so much benefit. The only thing that I advise is that if you're a parent and you want to use this type of stuff with your children, you have to always be present, right, with them, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's very powerful. When some of these new connections get made and the light bulbs come on and all this stuff, you want to be there for that, right? Because sometimes it can be startling for the child. And they're like, poof, all of a sudden something turned on. I mean, it's usually magnificent, wonderful, beautiful, but it can be. And also, you want to make sure that there is no risk factors for epilepsy, seizures, and or there's especially with Asperger's and things of this nature, autism, right? Some are very, very sensitive to stimulation, certain types of stimulation. So you want to really be careful about that too.
Yeah. Have you done any work with autism?
Not directly. I've done work with Asperger's and had which is a form, but we had amazing success with that.
Wonderful. That's just fascinating. And I know adults that are diagnosed ADHD, and this is exciting, really exciting. I understand you were one of Tony Robbins' youngest graduates, that you completed your famous fire walk at the age of 15. And then you went on to study with Dr. Richard Bandler, founder and creator of NLP. How has your work evolved from NLP to brainwave stimulation?
Well, it's the thing you got to. NLP is largely misunderstood, I think, for the vast majority of people, even for the vast majority of people that are actually taking it. This is what I've found, right? Because unless you get some really great education with it and you really have the experience and you take time to develop it, a lot of people don't get it, or they just miss the boat. NLP is really about a way of thinking about things. It's a way of approaching things, right? It's based in the idea that everything is possible. I mean, at its core, right? It's just about, and if somebody else can do something, we can model a system in which we could then ourselves replicate it and also help other people replicate it, maybe with some just little tweaks, right? And so when we talk about the way of thinking about things, the way of approaching the world, which is really what NLP for me is really changed the way that I approach problems and difficulties. Because I'll tell you that I've made different strides and improvements in brainwave stimulation technology, especially over the last year and a couple months since November 2013, that has never been possible before. Right? These things simply were not being done, and there wasn't even software and programs even available to even help me do it. I had to have technology written for me. It didn't exist. And the ability to solve these problems and approach these problems, NLP has really helped with that. It's Richard Bandler always used to say, I discovered a lot of things because I didn't know any better. People would say, you can't do that. That's impossible. That type of language doesn't exist in my world. I mean, it exists. I hear it, but it doesn't process to me at any level that has any meaning. That makes sense there.
Yeah, it does. Thanks.
Jeffrey, well, I'm going to ask you this question couched into something else. When I was young, 8 years old, my father died, and I had tremendous pain for many, many years. And I can't remember what the program was called, but it kind of sounds a little bit like what you're talking about, but it was using tuning forks to kind of retrain the brain. But what my question really is what's the difference between brainwave entrainment and brainwave stimulation?
Well, we use pretty much the same technology to create that end product, whatever it is. The main difference is this. Brainwave entrainment's end game is a little bit different. The whole purpose of brainwave entrainment is to coerce the brain to change its dominant electrical activity to match and then follow these external light or sound frequencies, mostly sound, but we can do it light, and then move it around, right? And this all came about because, somebody put an EEG machine on a monk, and they looked at their brainwave activity, and they went, look at that. I wonder if we could use this stimulatory technology, create what's called a frequency-following response. That's what brainwave entrainment really, for the most part, is about. The whole idea is you want to create this frequency-following response and shift the electrical activity up or down, right? And they thought maybe we could induce some of these great skills and feelings and so on and so forth that this monk has. And brainwave entrainment, as popular as it got, really, it's really because of marketing, I think, and some of these things that people observed. But the reality is that when you look at the hardcore research and the peer-reviewed clinical research, good stuff, entrainment is very rarely mentioned. It's really just about brainwave stimulation. And so the key difference here is that brainwave stimulation is not trying to get a frequency-following response. We get one sometimes, and that's okay. That's perfectly fine if that's the highest good for the brain. Brainwave stimulation is only concerned with providing healthy, vibrant frequencies that we know are really good for people, and it's the act of the brain's response that does the work, right? So if it responds in kind, that's great. If it responds with a different frequency, so if I'm giving it 9.8 cycles per second, the brain sort of pulses at 10.5 as a result, that's what the brain has to do, right, for its highest good. Trying to force it to go at 9.8 may not be the healthiest thing, right? So that's the key difference between brainwave stimulation and brainwave entrainment.
Well, as a follow-up, so the brainwave entrainment would be, can you just go a little bit deeper in that? Because I'm really trying to understand. The brainwave entrainment would be training the brain to be in a happier state. Is that correct?
Well, that's a result. That's okay. A side effect that can happen. Okay, so entrainment or harmony, or the whole idea is that people that create brainwave entrainment and that are using a frequency-following response, they simply just want to cause the brain to match and follow whatever frequencies it's hearing. That's the goal, right? And then because we've been studying EEGs for well over 100 years, and we know a lot of things. We know that brainwave activity is remarkably consistent from one person to the next, right? When we're asleep, our brainwave activity looks one way. When we're awake, it looks another. When we're performing at our peak intellectual performance, it looks another way. When we're sad, we're angry or depressed, it looks another way, right? And so because we have all this information and we have a technology that when we give these specialized frequencies, sounds, or pulses of light, we know the brain responds to them, right? This frequency-following response is actually a natural function of the brain. And so brainwave entrainment says, okay, let's look at all the research we know in electrical activity in the brain. We know that 10 cycles per second, that's an alpha frequency. We know that when people are pulsing at 10 cycles per second, it's more likely that they're going to produce serotonin, or at least things are going to happen in the body. Most of serotonin is actually synthesized in the gut. But, we know that process will sort of initiate. So people create this technology to say, let's create a track that will help people get into this 10 cycles per second, and their goal is just to get them there, right? That's the entire goal, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. but I used to do tons of brainwave entrainment. I've shifted my whole way of thinking about things, though, to getting away from trying to create a frequency-following response, because there are subtle differences in people, right? And I think coercing a brain to change its dominant brainwave pattern through a frequency-following response is not necessarily in the highest good at any given moment in time, right? So simply just providing 10 cycles per second and not attempting to create a frequency-following response is actually a much better way of doing things. We allow the brain to respond exactly how it wants to respond, and that active response from the brain is perfect. And it's part of what helps create the healing and whatever needs to be done inside the brain. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. And I was also, while you were describing that, and I don't know if this ties in at all, but I kind of feel like it does myself. So, in essence, we are also affected by those around us that are pulsing at higher levels or lower levels, for that matter. So when, for instance, like this phone call we're having today, that people are wanting to learn about this, if we're a large group of people, can we, in your opinion, do we affect raising our levels of our pulsing at higher levels? Can we affect each other then?
Oh, I believe so. Absolutely, absolutely. And I think we've all had that experience, right? When you walk into a room and you're the only happy person in the room, don't you know it, right? You feel it right away, right? And when you walk into a room and you're happy, but everybody else is exhilarated and excited, and don't you get infected by that? Absolutely, you do. So I think that's part of, energetically, and we can see some of this stuff with the right equipment, in terms of how we share energy and vibration with ourselves. So it is, it's incredibly, what's the word I'm looking for? It's contagious. Our energy is contagious, and the energy of a group is contagious. The attitudes of a group is contagious. All of that.
Mm-hmm. Dee, do you want to take this listener's question? Because we actually have it on our list too, but I thought you might want to take it.
Let's see. Well, the question is your work based on real science, or is this New Age processing?
It is based on hardcore science. It is based on clinical, peer-reviewed science that I test and that I do. See, we can talk about this in terms of New Age stuff, right, and higher level thinking and all these wonderful trains of thought. But the technology itself, really, especially the technology I developed and I call passive brain fitness, has the unique capacity to shift and move electricity and blood flow in the brain, right, away from those areas like the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, right, that is where self-doubt and anger and all that kind of stuff lives. Right? And so that's real science, and it's been well documented and well researched. Now, that unique ability to be able to do that opens up possibilities for every way of thinking that you can imagine. See, because we are what we think. We are what we eat. And so if you want to use this to increase positivity and energy for the law of attraction, it'll help with that, right? Because it's going to help you stay positive. It's going to help your brain work that way. If you want to use it to increase your capacity to learn new things because, you've got an hour left, to cram before an exam, it'll help you with that too. So the applications range, I guess, from the absolute scientific to just, your creativity is the limit.
Right. If you've just joined us, you're listening to Jeffrey Gignac on the Living in Oneness and Community Circle Call for Humanities team. We'd like to apologize. We have a few people complaining about the static. We are working on that and trying to make it better. So back to our topics, just from the listener's question, is your work based on real science or New Age processing? I think people are suspicious about things to do with the brain and mind control. And is there research in academia that supports your work? And what does it say?
Yeah, there's a boatload of it, and absolutely. I mean, it's not one of these things that is necessarily easy to find, especially because there's so many people that have just sort of jumped on this bandwagon and say, this brainwave entrainment is going to do this for you, it's going to do that for you. But some of the best research that's ever been done, and like I said, it's clinical, peer-reviewed research. That means other doctors have looked at this research and said, I'm going to stake my reputation on it that this is good stuff, right? And we've got all kinds of studies that say that we can increase intellectual performance, processing speed. We can reduce pain before surgeries. People undergoing dental surgery, there's been research on this, and it's good stuff. Again, clinical, peer-reviewed. Work with ADHD kids, sleeping, using 20 to 30 minutes of delta before going to sleep can actually increase the quality of your sleep after about 30 days. I mean, it just goes on and on and on and on. But the research is so often clouded with how a lot of people talk about things. And now I've made a lot of new innovations, and we're working on getting a Harvard research done on the new innovations that I've made, although all the innovations I've made are absolutely based in hardcore science. And there's, in terms of mind control, that's, I kind of always have a little chuckle about that. There's this technology is not used for mind control. It won't melt anybody's brain. It won't do, anything like that. It could be used, I think, potentially to make somebody a little more receptive to messaging. And sometimes I use it that way with clients. I go, we're going to have, I want you to be really receptive to all the positivity I'm going to offer you, so let's do a little brainwave stimulation. Right? So it can be used that way. But unscrupulous people, I guess, could also use it that way for bad things. But in terms of getting into using this technology on yourself in a way that's really positive, I mean, as long as you don't have any of the risk factors for epilepsy or seizure, I mean, this is just all positivity.
How does your work help people in their lives generally?
Well, let's put it this way. Anything you do, anything you think, hinges on the quality of the functioning of your brain. So, when we improve the functioning of a person's brain, we improve, potentially, every area of their life. Every single area. So whatever it is that individually that you're focusing on or that you're passionate about, when your brain works better, you're going to do better. One of the things that we know and what neuroscience has taught us is that when the electricity and blood flow, number one, the brain is an incredibly efficient organ, right? And it just doesn't spread the energy and the blood flow around everywhere all the time. No, it condenses and moves or trends towards expansion or trends towards restriction based on what you're thinking, feeling, or doing at any given moment in time, right? So we know that in the past, when we had stress, right, it's usually because we were hunting something or we were trying not to get eaten by some kind of prehistoric, back in the day, right? So what would happen is that all the blood flow would condense into certain areas that would favor our ability to run, jump, and do all these incredible things. Well, a lot of that these days really doesn't serve us very well. Those feelings of stress, that fight or flight, right? The same kind of thing happens in our brain. All the electricity and all the blood flow drain out of all our thinking areas and condense to one of these areas that turn on all these abilities to fight or flight. But really, we're sitting in front of our computers or we're sitting in front of our chairs thinking about what will be or what could happen. Mm-hmm. And then when we go try to solve the problem, we can't do it because all the really beautiful resources that we have access to our brain are being choked off because of the way the blood flow and electricity moves, right? That makes sense. So how does this help people in their lives? When you sit down and use a 7-minute, 20-minute, or 40-minute session, depending on what variation of the technology you're using, you're encouraging blood flow and this expansion of activity towards expansion and away from restriction. And if you do that on day one, is it going to solve all your problems? No. Right? But if you do it again and again and again and again, and 5, 6, 7 days, 10 days, 20 days down the road, what you find is that it becomes easier and easier to use the technology and to slip into these states and to have brain activity that trends towards expansion instead of restriction. And so what will that do for you?
Yeah, I've been using it, recently started using it, and I can tell you for myself, I've gone through a lot of stress over the past year. I lost my home in a flood, and my fiancé has had all kinds of health issues. And so for me, what I am noticing is the ability to bounce back, the ability to stay focused on my work and focused on making steps, making small incremental changes to bring about a different way of being.
Yeah, and a lot of people say that it's really helpful for goal achievement.
Yeah.
So whatever it is that you're striving for in your life, to the degree that your brain supports that, is going to be the degree of your success. So it can be an amazing gift. We've had people say, you know, I made more money in the last 3 months than I did in the last 3 years. I had a lady call me the other day, and she said, Jeff, on my private number, by the way, which I don't even know how she got, but this happens from time to time when people really want to speak to me. And she said, you saved my life. She said, I was depressed for several years, and I was ready to take my own life. You know, and I found your technology, I used it every day, and suddenly I'm looking at the world like I can handle this, I can do it. And that's the power of, you know, because what happens, anything that we practice or do over and over again, there's a part of our brain, its job is just to automate it, right? First it starts to simplify it, but if we continue doing it, it automates it. And that doesn't apply just to skills. It applies to habits of feeling emotion. It applies to blood flow to electrical activity in the brain. Remember I told you about that job that I had that I hated? By 2 p.m. every day, I would cross that threshold of stress and anxiety, and I could literally feel myself losing IQ points, you know? I'd drop 20 IQ points by 2 p.m. every single day. When I left that job, this is what I noticed. Now, the reason for all that stress was gone in my life, right? But I was at that job for 13 years. By 2 p.m. every single day, even a couple months afterwards, I would start to get stressed and dumber, right? You know, at 2 p.m. because it was a habit of functioning. And so what sometimes happens is that things happen in people's lives and they're traumatic and they go through trauma and it's depressing. But if nothing stops to break that cycle and it continues and continues, what happens is that sometimes areas of the prefrontal cortex won't get good circulation or good electrical activity for a very long time. And it becomes really hard to break out of it. And then if we can get that blood flow back into that area, for someone that hasn't had it in that area of their brain for 2 years, it's like a miracle. It's an absolute miracle.
Well, I'm absolutely riveted. I, too, have been, what I like about the 7 minutes, I can't think of the exact title of it right now. That
Smarter in 7 minutes.
I'm sorry, what was that again?
Smarter in 7 minutes.
Yes. The one thing I really like about that is that in my day, because I go all day long, you know, doing what I do, is that if I feel like, okay, because I've been using that as, okay, I need 7 minutes, you know, and I can't say that I've gotten smarter, but I can tell you I feel a lot more relaxed, where it's just, okay, this is for me, it's 7 minutes, it's not going to ruin the rest of my day, you know, scheduling-wise, and that's one of the things I really like about that. So I agree with what Dee said earlier, but I wanted to ask you, in our world, it's so filled with worry for many of us. Many people are dealing with addictions, whether it's alcohol, drugs, or smoking, or whatever not so healthy vice that they're going after. And you talked a little bit about depression. And I wonder how this technology can help those who are struggling with these kinds of things.
Yeah, and we've had some really great success with various forms of addiction, and it's just about way of understanding addiction, right? And, you know, the thing is, there's areas of our brain that must have pleasure. Must. It's not an option. It will do whatever it can to get instances and moments of pleasure. And oftentimes, alcohol or cigarettes or all these things, they help boost these chemicals. They give us those moments of pleasure, and that's what makes it so addictive. Now, pleasure is different from happiness. Big difference. Happiness is characterized by an overall sense of well-being. And so happiness survives a bad day. Happiness survives, you know, some terrible experiences because it's underlying, it's consistent, moves all the way through. Right? And so if you have a high degree of happiness in your life, when bad things happen, your brain doesn't suffer as much. The blood flow doesn't restrict as much. It doesn't, you know, because there's this overall sense of happiness. So we talk about using this technology in a way to increase somebody's overall level of happiness by improving the circulation in the brain, by encouraging the production of positive brain chemicals and discouraging the production of bad brain chemicals. And so this technology helps to it helps to get people to feel better more often. And when that happens, they're able to make better choices about, you know, the things that maybe are not so healthy in their life. They feel more in control because they have more pleasure. They have more of this underlying sense of happiness. I'd like to make one quick point, and this comes up a lot when we talk about the program Smarter in 7 Minutes, right, is that the whole idea of Smarter in 7 Minutes is not to make you physically smarter in 7 minutes. That would be ridiculous. Okay? It's not to increase your physical intelligence in 7 minutes. Okay, but what it is about is to improving the blood flow to areas of the brain that you find more useful, that will serve you better for whatever it is that you're going to be using your brain for in your day. Right? Now, actually increasing physical intelligence is possible over the long term as you continue to use it, you know, because it shares a lot. I call it passive brain fitness technology because, you know, it shares a lot of commonalities with actual real fitness. If you had a fitness goal and you go to the gym one time, you wouldn't expect to, achieve your goal that one time, would you? You might have to go back a few times, you know. And so when it comes to actually boosting long-term intelligence and memory, well, this is more of a long-term process. But in the short term, we can shift and move the activity. We can help you feel more relaxed. And this is what we know for sure. If we gave you a test to really test your intellectual capacity at any given moment in time, when you're stressed, you would have a certain score. And if we relaxed you and gave you the same test, you would score higher. We know this to be true. Right? So, in fact, you didn't feel smarter in 7 minutes, but in fact you were.
Surprise! Happy surprise for me. I want to ask about meditation, getting centered, mindfulness, and these things are more and more appearing in our media today. Do you think we're starting to be more mainstream with these kinds of ideas and practices so that we can get our minds still? And how, I want to add to that, does your program help that process of stilling the mind, even though I just said it did for me? But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it certainly does, and it does for the vast majority of people, because as you sit there and you put on a set of headphones and you load up a video, whether it's on your mobile device or your computer, and you give it your full attention for 7 minutes, and maybe you play it twice, so you got 14 minutes. You are practicing mindfulness. Now, this is sort of assisted practicing, but it still counts, right? It's still a way of quieting your mind. A lot of people will find that after they go through a 7-minute session, a lot of the chatter has calmed down. You know, sometimes it takes a little while for the technology to kick in. If somebody uses it while they're just absolutely in chaos, they might not notice a huge shift, but if they stick with the technology and they make it a part of their everyday life, they'll start to notice that it calms down more and more each time. And so it's very supportive for the practice of mindfulness. And then if you have time after you're done a session, it's always great to sit in silence, even if it's just an extra 90 seconds, and see what pops into your head. Notice thoughts come in and let them come in and let them go out.
So what is the single most important distinction in your work and your proprietary technology as compared to the many downloads and YouTube videos we see now on affirmations and meditation?
Right. Well, there is a lot of difference, right? The main is the technology itself. So we have auditory stimulation and we have visual stimulation. And so to sync those up perfectly, it'll never happen on the YouTube video. Never. Right? And that's really important. You have to receive the visual stimulation at the same rate and speed that you do the auditory stimulation to really have the profound effect on the brain. And so as soon as you load it up to YouTube and it starts to compress all kinds of stuff, it destroys it. And matter of fact, the technology to sync it up perfectly, as far as I know, didn't exist, or at least to the capacity where I had access to it. I actually had to have software written. In the past, light and sound stimulation, if you did get it, you had to get expensive equipment, and there would be these special goggles that would flash LED lights in your eyes, and then you would have these tones in your ears going to this kind of thing, and maybe you had a little bit of background sound to make it a little more present. And while that is clinically proven to be effective, I came to the conclusion that it was tragically underpowered, because if you think about it, flashes of light don't carry a lot of meaning, do they? We know this, that light coming into the eyes is projected to roughly 40% of the cortex of the brain. That's a big chunk of the brain. But the visual system, our internal visual system, doesn't respond to all types of light information stimulation the same way. A lot of its processing power is reserved for things like complex objects, space, simple objects interacting with complex objects, moving about in relationship to you. That stuff revs up the visual system and causes blood flow to move. Flashes of light, not a lot of meaning, right? And so in knowing this, what I did is I took this clinically proven visual stimulation and I embedded it inside complex shapes, simple shapes that move about on screen. So it has the clinically proven stimulation, but now there's this dimension that causes the internal visual system to really pay attention and rev up. And as a result, we get a more strong, positive, profound result. And it's the same thing with the auditory system. You know, tones, dot, 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 maybe even if they're masked in a little bit of sound or water, what have you, all very nice. But it doesn't take advantage of the pure processing power of our internal sound system. One of the most powerful systems we have is this thing called sound localization. It's this thing where, you know, if you're sitting in your apartment or your house and you're reading a book or something and a big bang happens behind you, instantly you're able to turn your head to the exact location where that sound came from. That's a form of triangulation, right? And so when sound moves in 3 dimensions and you figure out where it's coming from, that's really intense math. I don't know if anybody had the pleasure of doing that kind of math. It's complicated. And then when you start to move it in 3-dimensional spaces and you have many instances of sound localization, the math gets crazy. But your subconscious mind and your preconscious, you can do all this almost instantly. And so I took all this clinically proven auditory stimulation, And I started to put it in rich three-dimensional landscapes using frequency ranges that the brain has to pay attention to, which, by the way, are the frequency ranges of natural language and human voice. It's one of the only sounds that the brain has to pay attention to. So we put sound localization data points inside these audios so the brain actually can't ignore it, and it forces the brain to do an immense amount of internal math. And it causes the brain to bounce electrical signals back and forth between the right and left side of the brain repeatedly. By the way, that's how the brain does this form of triangulation. It has to bounce signals back and forth, back and forth. Typically, the way brainwave entrainment or brainwave stimulation was delivered in the past didn't do that. But when we use and leverage this natural system of sound localization, we're able to rev up that system, encourage more blood flow, and encourage expansion of electricity in the brain. And that's really important because, we know this. I've said this, I think, a couple times here, but when we look at the brain, what happens when there's negativity and stress, we see the electricity pretty much all balled up, stuck on one side or the other, usually spinning like a top. But when we use this type of technology that encourages this cross-hemispheric communication, bouncing these electrical signals back and forth between the hemispheres of the brain, that balled up electricity and stuck blood flow begins to unwind, and then it starts to tend towards expansion.
Wow. This hour is flying by, so I want to invite you, Jeffrey, to tell people about your program and give them any information they need.
Sure. Well, I think we sent everybody a free gift link, right, for the just to give it a try, give the Smarter in 7 Minutes a try, and a download. But on that download page, there is you have to scroll down a little bit, and it's not a big pressure sale thing. There's a little video sort of on the download page that says, hey, do you want to try it for free? Right? Why don't you get 3 full passive brain fitness packages, and you can try them out for 14 days absolutely for free. And I would encourage everybody to take advantage of that offer because you'll get an opportunity to really see what's there and what the technology can do for you. We know that the vast majority of people will get a positive shift in the way they think and feel the very first time around. Some people maybe take it a couple times, and for some people it's subtle at first, and for others it's a little bit better. But as you continue to use it, we know that the results get more profound over time. So the program, the Smarter in 7 Minutes membership, what it's all about is every single month we give you 2 complete passive brain fitness packages. It includes a passive brain fitness video and the audio versions. And the first package is all designed to help rev you up, right, to increase that blood flow, to improve your mental performance, to increase the capacity to make better decisions, to be more productive, to self-motivate, right, on demand, 7 minutes to help encourage that. And the second package is more of a gear down sort of feeling. It's designed to help you slow down, get into that really nice, introspective, mindful state. It continues to exercise the brain passively, but it's more for gearing down. And that's really important because depending on what time of the day you decide you want to use this technology, you might not necessarily want to get all revved up. You might want to calm down, but still have the opportunity to balance your brainwave activity. And so having these 2 packages is really, really handy to have that. And again, get the audio versions too. And then the other thing we started to do in the membership is that I started to talk about neuroscience and brain science and advanced applications. You get this training free. I mean, I've been studying neuroscience for a long time, and it's not exactly what I would call an easy read, And the research keeps coming. And some of it is very important, but it's really hard to understand what it's all about. So every month I also go through what's kind of new in neuroscience and what you need to know about what we've learned about our brains and how we can do some things in our lives to really improve the quality of life. Simple things, right? And we also talk about some nutritional elements as well because you got to feed that brain, right? It won't survive off potato chips and Coca-Cola, not at least very well. And so we talk about some of the nutritional things. And this is all bundled up, and we release this all every single month. So every single month you get a new package. And the reason why I think this is so beneficial, and by the way, the average person stays with me as a monthly member 211 days, which we actually think it's longer than that, but which blows away the industry standards. And it's because people continue to experience positive changes with the technology month after month. And so that's the offer. You can go and give it a shot for free. Go to the download page, and then there's another thing. You can sign up. It's risk-free. And if you decide you want to keep it, you can keep it.
Well, wonderful. Thank you for your generous offer, and thank you for sharing with Humanities Team audience. We really appreciate you being with us, Jeffrey. We'll be sending out the link to today's replay and also the link to pick up your free bonus gift from Jeffrey Gignac. And it's just been a pleasure, and this hour flew by. We'd love to have you come back and visit with us again, Jeffrey. We'd like to invite you to join us for the next 12 Spheres call with Jonathan Goldman on Thursday, January 15th. And again, thank you, Jeffrey. We sure appreciate your time, and thank you to our audience. It's just been a delight having you with us.
Well, thank you so much. It's been my pleasure, and I will come back and talk anytime.
Great. Have a great day.